and welcome to a Free Speech TV special. I'm your host, Meikko Love, and today I'm joined by award-winning journalist Amy Goodman to discuss the documentary Steal This Story, Please. Directed by Tia Lesson and Carl Deal, the documentary revisits some of the defining moments Goodman has covered. From war zones to protest movements, it raises the larger question of power, media, and the voices that often go unheard. Let's go to the trailer.
Hi, I'm Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!
I'm sorry, I'm running late for a meeting.
You weren't running late when you're just standing there, so.
My first impression, man, she doesn't care what anybody thinks.
We began on 9 radio stations.
She taught me to speak to those who are being deliberately silenced.
If she believes something, she's going to fight for it.
Independent media is the oxygen of a democracy.
The press is the enemy of the people.
We will not be silent.
Steal this story, please.
That was the trailer of Steal This Story, Please. Amy, thank you for being with me today.
It's so great to be with you.
First, I just want to say how inspiring the documentary is. For somebody that went to college and had hopes of working in mainstream media after I graduated and ended up working in independent journalism, it was nice to see how you also handled that trajectory and what you've done with your career thus far. So focusing on your career in independent journalism, what was it like being the subject of the documentary and not the person asking the questions?
I found it difficult personally because I'm a private person, but I really thought it was worth it to get out this model of independent journalism, which I think should be used in this country and around the world. Now, the fact is the people who did the documentary, the directors, Tia Lesson and Carl Deal, are a big deal, and that made it easier. They are brilliant, compassionate, incredibly good storytellers, master weavers. So working with them was an amazing experience. But covering this gamut of the years, I mean, the 30 and beyond, to say the least, I was in awe of their archival experience, the people that they interviewed, because Democracy Now! Is way bigger than just me. And as you see in the film, you know, first of all, the co-host of Democracy Now!, Juan Gonzalez, has been there for 30 years, like me, from the beginning. He had 2 DNs. He had Democracy Now! And the New York Daily News. He left that after 29 years. Nermeen Sheikh, who's been there for 15 years. And then the other producers that we work with, from Sharif Abdel-Qaddous to Jeremy Scahill. It was amazing to see how they so deftly wove it together.
And what made this the right moment for Steal This Story, Please? Do you see its timing as connected to the political moment and democracy and rights being challenged, or was it purely coincidental?
There couldn't be a more critical moment than now. We're speaking the day after Stephen Colbert did his last late night show on CBS. His ouster was announced right before there was the owners of Paramount were seeking a merger with Skydance, this major corporate merger that had to be approved by Trump's FCC. The owners are billionaire Trump allies, Larry and David Ellison. And a week after his ouster was announced last year, the merger was approved, and that merger was worth something like $8 billion. And now he was here for a few more months and now is gone. President Trump is going after the most powerful corporate media. And look, media is essential to the functioning of a democratic society. And we need independent media more than ever, because the difference between Democracy Now! And what you get on the networks is when we cover war, we're not brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. When we cover climate change, we're not brought to you by the oil, gas, and coal companies. When we cover inequality, we're not brought to you by the banks and the other financial institutions. We're brought to the listeners, the viewers, the readers, by them. I don't even like to say by the audience, because I consider it the citizenry of the world. Yes, independent media is essential to the functioning of a democratic society. It's why freedom of the press is enshrined in the US Constitution and the First Amendment, because the flip side of freedom of the press is the public's right to know. It's the only way you can have a meaningful democracy.
No, I agree. And like you said, we're seeing a lot of that being stripped away by the administration that's currently in office. As I was watching your interviews that you did about the documentary, a lot of the interviewers focused on East Timor, and specifically the assault that you and your co-host at the time, Alan, experienced. What was that like personally for you to survive such an attack like that?
That was formative. I think about it every day because I was there in 1991, well over 30 years ago. And East Timor is a tiny island nation, 300 miles above Australia. It is incredible that the way it was connected to the United States was through the barrel of a gun. Indonesia invaded East Timor in 1975. 90% of the weapons used were from the United States. The Indonesian army was trained, armed, and financed by the United States. And they invaded by land, by air, and by sea, and they committed one of the great genocides of the late 20th century, killing off a third of the Timorese population. I went there with my colleague Alan Nairn. He was doing a piece for the New Yorker magazine. I was doing a documentary for Pacifica Radio, and we survived a massacre. And 270 Timorese on that day, November 12, 1991, did not survive that massacre. The Indonesian soldiers, armed with US M16s, marched up 10 to 12 abreast. They came around the corner without warning, without hesitation, without provocation. They swept past us as we held our microphones up. Alan put the camera above his head. I had my tape recorder slung over my shoulder, and they opened fire on the crowd. They beat us to the ground. Alan threw himself on top of me to protect me from further injury. And they used their US M16s like baseball bats and slammed them against his skull until they fractured it. I think ultimately, while they put the guns to our heads after that, as we were laying on the ground, Alan covered in blood, in firing squad fashion, when we said to them, we were from America, America. We were from the same country their weapons were from. They would have to pay a price for killing us that they had never had to pay for killing the Timorese. They moved on. We were able to get up. We were taken by the Red Cross to a hospital as dozens of Timorese climbed on top of us and on top of the Red Cross Jeep, trying to escape this killing field. And at the hospital, the doctors and nurses started to cry when they saw us. I think because, we were not in worse shape than the Timorese. But because of what we represent to the people of East Timor, what we as Western journalists, and not only to the people of East Timor, but to people around the world, I think as Westerners we represent two things, the sword and the shield. The sword, because all too often Americans, the US government provides weapons to human rights abusing regimes, but they also see the American people as the shield. And they saw that shield bloodied that day, and that just deepened their despair.
Was there, because in the documentary, the next scene that we see after you talk about East Timor and what you just described right now, we see you at a press conference and you're talking about the experience that you and Alan went through. Was there ever a moment that you were like, maybe this is not what I want to do with my career? Or did you always have that fight in you that what was important was that the world knew about what was happening in other countries?
I don't feel like I had a choice. Once I saw this, once you know something, you have to follow through. And we are in so much less danger than the people who are at the target end, all too often, of US weapons. And it's our responsibility to let people know in this country, because we come from the most powerful country on earth. What our country does matters. And I really do think that people across the political spectrum in the United States would not approve of this if they knew. And that's the power of the media. It lets people know, and then they can make a decision. You know, when I talk about the corporate media, the networks, the corporate mergers of the media, and how many billions they're making, and the number of jobs that are being lost, I don't refer to it as the mainstream media anymore, because I don't think they represent the mainstream. I think Free Speech TV is mainstream media. I think Democracy Now! Is mainstream media. Because if you look at how people feel about war and peace, about the climate, about inequality, about racial injustice, about reproductive rights, those who care about these issues are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media.
Right. And so speaking of corporate media, as more media outlets come under corporate and billionaire ownership, do you believe journalists can fully serve the public and be honest about the systems that they're a part of? Or does that structure kind of place limits on how far truth-telling can go within what is considered mainstream media?
I mean, it puts enormous pressure. To talk about the corporate merger I was just referring to, first President Trump sued CBS for the 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris. And we all know as journalists, you do an interview for an hour, it's probably gonna happen with this interview. You do an interview for an hour and you cut it to 10 minutes. And if you're gonna be sued for this, I don't think Trump had a leg to stand on in this suit. But CBS didn't wait to go to court. They caved, they settled, they gave President Trump $16 million. Now that's a lot of money. But it's chump change compared to what Paramount and Skydance were gonna get with their merger, which was approved and they did merge, and that was like $8 billion. And who is the sacrificial lamb here? I mean, aside from a democratic society, so many jobs are being lost right now in the corporate media. Let's look at the Washington Post. The billionaire founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, also owns the Washington Post, and he has for over a decade. Under him, the motto, "Democracy dies in darkness," became the motto of the Washington Post, and it's true. Democracy dies in darkness. Well, it's very dark at the Washington Post right now, because right about the time that the US and Israel bombed Iran, you know, that first day, bombing the girls' school in Manab in southern Iran, and 175 people were killed, overwhelmingly little girls going to school. Bezos laid off a third of the news staff. Hundreds of reporters were laid off. We had a Washington Post reporter on soon after that, and she did an anatomy of that killing of the girls at the girls' school. It was amazing, with a US Tomahawk missile. But she wasn't working for the Washington Post anymore. She'd been laid off. The reporter in Ukraine, covering the front lines of what Russia's doing with Ukraine, yeah, she got a message from the Washington Post. She wasn't working for them anymore. Almost the entire Middle East desk was laid off. This is a massive problem. And we need a media that is independent. And when you have that, people can begin to regain trust in the media. We bring you not the pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong, but the people closest to the story. There's a part in the film at the end, this medley of horror, I would call it, of what happened with the immigrant crackdown that is continuing today in Minneapolis. And you see a woman who has been dragged out of her car. Her name happens to be Alia Rahman. And she's saying, please stop, let me make sense of this. She was on her way to the doctor. She's autistic, she's disabled, she has a cane. They smashed her window, they dragged her out of the car. She happened to be a US citizen, but I don't even like to bring that up because this shouldn't happen to anyone. And they dragged her out of the car. She's hanging with her hands held behind her. She's ultimately arrested, brought to the Whipple Detention Center in Minneapolis. And we interviewed her after she got out. And she told this horrific story of what happened to her and how brutalized she was. And then Congressmember Ilhan Omar of Minneapolis invited her to the State of the Union address. And we then said, could you come on again after witnessing the State of the Union? We'd like to talk to you in Washington, D.C. You know, Ilhan Omar is the Congress member who President Trump calls garbage. He calls the whole Somali community in Minneapolis garbage. And so even though Alia Rahman was ailing, she went to the State of Union and she sat like the guests do in the gallery. And she was sitting between like a mayor of one town and a police chief of another, because they were guests. At some point, Alia Rahman stood up in silence, bearing witness as President Trump was denigrating the Minneapolis community. She was dragged out by security again. I mean, it was absolutely astounding, and she was arrested. We had already planned to interview her. She went from jail to the remote studio we had her in Washington. She said, I'm wearing the same clothes I wore last night to the State of the Union because I just got out of jail, but I wanted to honor this commitment. She talked about what happened to her. And then, and this goes to the title of the documentary, Steal the Story, Please. Her story, told on Democracy Now!, was picked up by the New York Times, by the networks, by the Washington Post, because she was telling the story herself. And that's what I think we both do. You at Free Speech TV, what we do at Democracy Now!, is bring you those authentic voices. And then when they get picked up, I didn't want her story to be a Democracy Now! Exclusive. I consider an exclusive a failure. Because if we want these stories to be picked up, for that voice to ripple through the United States, through the world, because when we know what we have done, or when we know what our country does, we learn from those mistakes. And it's really critical to platform those voices.
So having sustained a career in independent journalism, as long as you've been able to, what tips would you give to people that want to maybe take that route but are nervous or are not sure how to go about it, are not sure what stories to look for or have resources to get to those stories? What tips would you give to them?
To follow your passion. I don't say everyone should become a journalist. I do think it matters though, and I think journalism is essential to the functioning of a democratic society. If you follow your passion, you're going to be best at that. I don't know the forms journalism is going to take here on in. I couldn't have predicted the social media platforms that there are. But if you stick to the basic tenets of good journalism, to be fair, to be accurate, to be curious, to respect the person you're talking to, if you're really interested in what they have to say, to investigate what are ways to find out if this story is true, these will extend to whatever form the platforms take in the future. And if you're hungry for this information, if you love to talk to people, I'd say pursue that. I mean, I look at the directors of the film, Steal the Story, Please, and how they have taken the story, how they've crafted it. They didn't know what would happen with it, even this critical point we've come to now. And it's gone through the film festival circuit in the United States. They have won at least 16 major awards, mainly audience choice awards for best documentary or best film at a film festival. Even the Human International Film Festival in Oslo, Norway. So it is global. And why audience favorite awards are so meaningful is that just people walking into a movie. You might know Democracy Now!, but your friend maybe never heard of it, and you drag them into the movie, and then everyone votes. And that film is the film that gets chosen. And you know, when you really care about what you do, I think, you know, the sky is the limit.
So we're also seeing a shift in how journalism looks on the surface. Outlets like TMZ are now confronting politicians in a way that is very direct and highly aggressive, something that independent journalists have been doing for a very long time. Do you see that as a real evolution in accountability, or more of a shift in what audiences are now willing to reward when journalism is entertainment driven?
You know, I think we have a special role to play. We are not trying to win a popularity contest. Right. We have to hold those in power to account. Whether Democrat or Republican or independent, that's the motto I've always, or it's the philosophy I've always used. I think that on the one hand, we have to hold those who have the power to account, and we have another responsibility. I mean, for example, the President of the United States is the most powerful, occupies the most powerful office on earth. But there is a force more powerful, and it is everyone together. Whether it's people, we're sitting in a movie theater right now, people who come out to independent cinemas because they care about hearing other voices. Whether it's people in the streets, thousands, sometimes millions of people across the United States and around the world who may be saying no to war, maybe saying no to authoritarianism. That is extremely empowering, especially when there are elections in a country and people get to decide who are going to be their leaders. Our job is to go to where the silence is, to go to the streets, to go behind the scenes. And, you know, it's often not silent. It may be not hitting the corporate media radar screen because people are organizing, they're rowdy, they're raucous. But we have to put our mics there, and we have to show what people are doing, not only their own personal experience, but how they're building community, like Minneapolis. I mean, people across the political spectrum in response to the immigrant crackdown and the shooting of Alex Preti and Renee Good, they came out, and when an immigrant family was afraid to go get their groceries, they shopped for them. Afraid to take their kid to school, they took their kid to school. And we need to see, this doesn't just happen, it's movements that are getting organized and show the mechanisms of those movements. I mean, Dr. King, just walking alone, he would not have made the kind of difference he made if he wasn't the leader of a movement. And that's what matters, and that's what the media so often ignores. That's the fabric of Democracy Now!, is covering those movements that make history.
So you spoke on kind of the ripple effect that happens when you bring somebody to a movie theater to see Still This Story Please, and that may not have been informed about Amy Goodman or Democracy Now! After people engage with your works, whether it be Still This Story Please or Democracy Now!, what is your hope that the audience and the viewers actually do with that information? Well,
and in the case of Democracy Now!, I think it's critical that people watch Democracy Now! Because as I travel the country with the film, doing the Q&A afterwards, we find even though we deal with the most difficult issues, that people are inspired because it's people who are doing something about it that we're interviewing. And on Free Speech TV, Democracy Now! Plays several times a day, daily, grassroots, global, independent, international investigative news hour, just being empowered without information and seeing how not only people in this country deal with what's happening, but around the world. And people come from all over the world, and it's important they watch Free Speech TV. It is critical that we be able to see our own country through something other than a corporate lens, and really critical, I would say a matter of national security, that people in the rest of the world get to see us through something other than a corporate lens. But also, as you talk about people seeing this film, it is having a galvanizing effect all over the country. I, of course, have been to films all my life, and we do TV, satellite TV, regular, but really I learned that we are sort of film adjacent. I didn't know about this world of cinema as much as I thought I did. And seeing what it means for a film to be distributed independently, because all too often political documentaries are not even picked up. I come from New York, so it opened in New York first. at the IFC Center that shows many documentaries. It was the largest opening weekend for a documentary in 10 years. In Milwaukee, there were 2 films playing. We came out at the same time as The Devil Wears Prada 2. So Steal the Story, Please has come out at the same time as The Devil. And so there was The Devil and Steal the Story in the 2 different cinemas. And at some point, someone checked that day before the films started. And The Devil had sold something like 79 tickets and Steal the Story 790 tickets. It is amazing, the hunger for independent voices now.
Oh, wow.
And I really do think it shows real change, an urgency, what people are looking for right now. And that's really the hope, because information is power.
So you mentioned watching Democracy Now! And how important it is not only to watch Democracy Now!, but also to watch that on Free Speech TV. I want to know how Free Speech TV played into your transition of Democracy Now! From radio to television, if at all.
Oh, it was very important. I mean, first, what happened is it was just an emergency. It was the 9/11 attacks, and we were the closest national broadcast radio to the World Trade Center towers. And we were doing our show that day, 8:47, the first plane hits the first tower of the World Trade Center. Now we broadcast 8 Eastern time in the morning, then it was 9. 8:47, we didn't really know what had happened. 9 o'clock, the show started. 9:03, the second plane at the second tower. And then it started to develop something major, and the towers were coming down within the next few hours. People were running down the street covered in ash. We worked out of an old firehouse, a 100-year-old firehouse that had been converted into a media center, and they opened the doors to people to let them make calls to get water as well. And we just kept broadcasting on radio. But the local public access TV station, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, said they wanted to start broadcasting Democracy Now! As emergency broadcasting, because they had a fiber line to the firehouse. And so we said, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the sound, because radio was everything to me. They said, no, we think it's going to be fine. And they started broadcasting. And then station after station. But Free Speech TV picking it up was so important because it was satellite TV for the entire country. And it was beaming out to everyone at once. And it was on 2 different satellite networks. And that was extremely important. So we really grew together.
We've talked about this political moment that we're in and how important it is to really pay attention to what is happening around you and to get involved in any way that you can. What do you feel viewers, people in general, are missing or are failing to see in this moment?
Well, that's a good question. I think that people are seeing their neighbors, their communities, their families deeply concerned about what's happening right now. But they're not seeing that reflected in the media. Because in that corporate media ecosphere, you got those same old know-nothing pundits. But in independent media, I think they are seeing an echo of what they're experiencing. And that is what is so important. And that's why we have to build independent media in this country. Really the model for independent media came from Pacifica Radio, where I came out of. The first Pacifica station, KPFA in Berkeley. It was a radio station in 1949. A war resistor came out of the detention camps named Lou Hill and said, we need a media outlet that's not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. 1960, my station, New York. WBAI, where you'd hear Malcolm X debating James Baldwin over the effectiveness of nonviolent civil disobedience. But the fourth Pacifica station, there were 5, was KPFT in Houston in the Petro Metro. And it went on the air in the spring of 1970. Within weeks, it was blown up by the Ku Klux Klan. They strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter. KPFT worked fast, rebuilt their transmitter in a few weeks, went back on the air, and the Klan strapped 15 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens, right in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I thought was a good song. But anyway, it then took months for them to rebuild. In January of 1971, Arlo comes back to Houston to finish his song live on the air, and they go back on the air, and they've been broadcasting ever since. I can't remember if it was the Exalted Cyclops or the Grand Dragon, you know, the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, because I often confuse their titles. But he said it was his proudest act. Why? I think he understood how dangerous Pacifica Radio is, how dangerous independent media is. Dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, an aunt in Iran, an uncle in Afghanistan, it breaks down caricatures and stereotypes that fuel the hate groups. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it's wielded as a weapon of war, which is why we have to take the media back. I call Pacifica, I call Democracy Now!, I call Free Speech TV noble experiments that are coming into their own, that are absolutely essential because we come to know each other. How do we learn about other countries unless we're from there or we have a friend or a family member from there? We learn about it through the media. And we need to hear about it through people who live those experiences from those countries. And when they become people, it just makes it much less likely that you can say things like the president does, we're going to wipe them out.
Yeah. Amy Goodman, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Hearing your perspective, it's been an honor, truly. For those who want to see Still This Story, Please, or learn more, visit stillthisstory.org. I'm your host, Meikko Love, and this is a Free Speech TV special.